important question, I think, for me to remember to ask myself sometimes, okay, why am I sharing this?
Mm,
What is the bigger purpose here? Because
yeah.
I'm not just there to talk about myself, whether it's online or in the classes. And what I've set up this structure where I will share stuff about myself on social media, but to a very, very certain extent. Like the boundaries there are quite clear.
Welcome to Who Cares About My Story, the podcast on how sharing your personal brand story can impact your business. We will explore the perks and also the behind the scenes challenges of figuring out what to share. I'm your host, Reme Mancera, a personal brand strategist who loves finding the story connectors that illustrate the benefits of what you offer. And by the way, you don't need a Hollywood style for that. In case you ever wonder, remember, your story is relevant and worth telling. Hey there, I am delighted to bring you today's episode. Our guest is Biddy, a yoga teacher based in the Netherlands who is currently training to become a certified yoga therapist. Biddy hosts both online and in-person classes, workshops, and retreats, all with one main goal: to help you connect to your own body and move or rest in a way that fits you. During our conversation, Biddy highlights the power of embracing the possibility of change and taking small steps toward growth. She talks about her transformation from an impatient, high-pressure lifestyle to a calm, patient, and self-aware person. It was about slowing down, feeling better in her skin, and living a more fulfilled life. Biddy explains how opening up about her own journey has inspired her students, creating a safe space for them to check in, discover what works for them, and exchange experiences. By sharing her struggles and lessons, she offers insight into her unique approach to yoga and body awareness, attracting the right students and building a stronger community. Tuning in to learn how Biddy changed her life and how telling her story has impacted her business. Now, let's dive in. Hello, Biddy. Thank you for being here and welcome to Who Cares About My Story. I am delighted to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Please tell us who you are and what you do.
Where to start? I'm Biddy. I am a yoga teacher, and I am based in the Netherlands, in Delft. And the things that I do with yoga are spread out a little bit. So I teach group classes, I organize retreats, I host an online membership, and I also work a lot with people one-on-one, which is something that I'm doing more and more, and I love doing as well. Yeah.
Nice. Tell us, how did you get here? Can you share a bit about your story?
Absolutely, yes. I've been a full-time yoga teacher now since 2017, and I actually started my yoga teacher training mostly because I loved how practicing yoga made me feel, for one, but also it made a big change in my life, how I felt, because I've always been someone who has been sick a lot, who had a lot of injuries, and I used to push through them. Had a lot of office jobs before, and I think at some point my body was just, I was exhausted basically, and I kept getting injury after injury. And then my physiotherapist recommended I try yoga. I found the right teacher at the right moment, and I started practicing regularly. And then I realized that I started to feel better, and not just physically, but also mentally. I started feeling better. And then I got curious. So I never started the yoga teacher training thinking, oh, I'm going to be a yoga teacher, because I thought I was way too impatient to ever be that. But then when I did the first weekend of training, something clicked. We had to do this little trial class on the other students, and I started talking. I was like, oh, but this is really, really great. And it felt like finally I found something that just fit me like a glove. And from there, things started happening and it grew and it grew and it grew.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love because I listened to one of your podcast episodes,
Hmm.
and when you were sharing that click and how you felt. Yeah, I love that moment of realization, like, wow, this is something that I really
Yeah.
enjoy and make a difference, right?
Yeah. It was an actual light bulb moment, you know? Yeah.
That's cool. And going to the topic of the this podcast,
Hmm.
how do you think sharing your own story has impacted your business?
I think it took a while for me to even let in my own story. I think in the beginning when I started my work, I was a freelancer and I was trying to just get as much experience as possible. So I took on every job that I could get and I was teaching a lot. And then at some point I started noticing my body feeling less good and myself mentally also getting a little bit exhausted again in a not so good way. I mean, I don't mind being exhausted every now and then, but I noticed that it wasn't really working. And then I figured out with a lot of help, it wasn't just me. I had a really great coach and I have a great support system. I figured out that all the jobs that I was doing were not necessarily a good fit for me, even though I might be able to do them, I might have the credentials to do them. It wasn't really suiting who I am as a person as much as I needed it to. And then I started making some changes and I started to focus on the jobs where I could actually fully be myself and not, for instance, live up to the expectations of a studio where I was teaching. Because when you are hired somewhere, you're expected to offer a certain type of class, maybe even certain movements that you're supposed to bring in. And I'm going to just be honest, not all yoga movements fit my body. And I think for me, being able to start sharing that, and that was the first way of me starting to share my story. Like, listen, I cannot do a headstand. My body does not do that. And even if I could, I don't think I would because of how my body is built. And being able to start sharing that, I think I started to attract the classes and the people that fit me better. And then it's kind of like it started feeding itself, right? The more you are able to be yourself and show yourself, the more you attract the people that are actually a good fit. So I think that's how the ball got rolling a little bit. But then I was still quite hesitant in sharing my own story, also because in some of the trainings that I took, it's a little bit frowned upon. You're not supposed to, it's not about you when you
Mhm.
teach. It's about, obviously, it's about the people who come to your class. So for me to make that shift where thinking I need to share a little bit about myself in order for people to feel, at peace and feel safe and feel like they can be themselves as well, you need to show yourself. But I think it took me a while to get there. Also to get the experience of working with people, in this manner, because it's a personal thing you're doing when you're teaching yoga, I think.
Mm. Yeah, and I totally agree on that. How for creating that safe space, people need to feel that you are a human, you have honest uh, stories, you have your vulnerability,
Yes.
and they can relate to that, and they can feel connected to that person behind that brand or the position of the yoga teacher or any other role at that case.
Exactly. And I think also, especially like you go out into the town where I live, there's so many yoga studios and there's so many yoga teachers. And I think the reason people love going to a yoga class is not just because of the yoga, it's also about the person teaching it. Because if you don't click on some level, whether it's just because you like the voice or you like the pace of their classes, there has to be something that you actually connect to for you to come back, right? I think everyone has had an experience where you go somewhere and you hear someone speaking and you're like, oh no, this is not a good fit, right? And that's normal. That's the way it should be. But I think when you find your own voice, it's easier to attract the people who actually will actually click with you and benefit from your teachings or your guidance or your offerings.
Yeah, and I saw that you mentioned these in several places about how not all movements are for all bodies, and you are helping people to figure it out the kind of yoga that will do well for them and for their bodies.
Yes, and I think that's partly also because of my story, because I am hypermobile, which means that I have a lot of space in my joints and I easily overextend my body, which also leads to injury real easy.
Mm.
And for a long time, that was not diagnosed because I'm of Asian heritage and a lot of people are quite flexible. So I always thought that was just a family trait. Through yoga, I actually found out that I was overextending some of my joints and that was causing a lot of trouble. So for me, first of all, to realize that was a big aha moment. All these puzzle pieces started to fall into place. But then I also started looking at everyone in my classes, everyone I have in front of me, through different eyes almost, because you become more careful when you know that this is possible. And I think what I try to do most, and that's the red thread in all my classes and all my teachings, is I tell them a little bit about how I did not know my body until I started practicing yoga and I started learning more and I started noticing the effects of what I was doing in my daily life and on my yoga mat, the effects that that had on my body. And that is what I'm trying to share with people, just to give them that moment to become aware of how they move. Why do they move like that? Is it just because that's the way they move, or is there maybe some pain somewhere causing them to make different movements? Just that, I say just, but it's not just the connection between the brain and the body. It's so easy to lose it a little bit in our current world where there's so many different impulses coming or input coming towards your brain. And I think the yoga mat is a really great place to reconnect to yourself and to check in like, hey, what do I actually feel? Why am I breathing so fast? Or, you know, not ignoring the body. And it's easier for me to explain that to people when I tell them I did it myself and I still do it. I mean, I've been full-time teaching for a while, but I still catch myself rushing past what my body is trying to tell me, right? So by sharing that it's okay to forget, by sharing that it's okay to not notice at times, I think I make it easier for people to then actually come to class and make that connection in that moment because
Mm.
it's an ongoing process, right?
Yeah.
Life changes all the time, so how we are aware of ourselves and of the world around us changes all the time as well.
Mm. Yeah. And I like how you are using your story in your classes, because sometimes for people I think that using your story is just connected to the social media content or
Mm,
how you introduce yourself in your about me page, but it's deeper than that. You can use it in creative ways, for example here as in an onboarding process where you are making them understand this is a safe space. You are allowed to check yourself and see what fits and not. And so it's using your own story to create that safe space and to make them understand that this is a process and you know because you were there too and it's something that is going on. And I like how you just do that in a way that is for making them feel better and allow them to to trust the process, right?
yes, exactly. And I think it helps sometimes um to be reminded of the fact that the person in front of you is also human. Like I know a lot of people from my training, they would feel really bad when they made a mistake during class when they said the wrong leg or something.
Mm.
And for all the things that I am hard on with myself, that's not one of them because I remember being in yoga classes and just being really relieved that the person in front of me made a mistake because it humanized them, you know? And you're like, oh, if
Yeah.
they can make a mistake, then I can make a mistake as well. So I
Yeah.
tend to giggle a little bit because I actually have to laugh when I mess up left and rights and stuff like that. But it's also an invitation to the people in front of you as well, like to also, have a laugh. It's okay to make a mistake. Actually, laughing is super good for your body. So yeah. So even in those little things, by sharing it in the moment, that makes it a nicer place to be, I think, because you're not afraid of messing up or whatever
Yeah.
people might be afraid of when they come into a new class. And I
Yeah.
think in group classes where I do it, it's really nice, but it's even more like the first times I started sharing about myself was when I started doing 1 day retreats and weekend retreats and then week retreats as well, because there's a little bit more space to share there. So I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, that's where it started. But then you start finding your ways to bring little bits of yourself into your teachings. And what you said about social media, I try to share it there as well. And that's the thing that I find really hard, like how to share my story there. Like when I'm on my yoga mat, when I'm one-on-one with people or in a group, it's fine. That's where, like I said, I'm in my element there. That's my happy place. But then trying to bring that into social media, the website and stuff like that, that's where I find it a little bit harder.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because you have in front of you in the yoga classes your students, and in social media they are there between the rest of the audience, but you
Yes.
don't have them the, as
Yep.
present as when you are just in front of them. But at the end, or that's something that is good to remind ourselves, how when we are sharing content or when we are talking about ourselves and our stories, the person that we have in mind is the same person that we will help with what we offer and the solution that we have for them. And sometimes social media, the idea of the audience that we have is not them. It's maybe more
Hmm.
general, or even people that we know and we don't feel so comfortable sharing because what
Yes.
they would think about us and all that stuff.
Yeah.
um and I think that's one of the reasons why for some people, and I would like love to know your own answers to this, is how some people think about who will care about my story, why it's relevant to share it. I would like to know how you have gone, if you have ever wondered about this, and how has been your process.
Yeah. I definitely recognize that thought. It's like the imposter syndrome kicking in a little bit as well. For me, I think what's the biggest obstacle is that I'm thinking of all the people. I have 800 people following me on Instagram. It's not a lot. It's also not no one. Like it's a fair amount of people. It always I'm very conscious that I don't want people to make wrong movements, which is why I stopped posting movement. I'm not doing the asana. Like you have some yoga teachers who are really good at explaining poses and stuff like that. I tried that for a little bit because I think it's a good way to get views on social media. But then I started to worry because if someone is hypermobile like I am, they need to be aware of different things than if someone is really stiff. So my brain started going to all the places where people might injure themselves if they just do a 2 minute thing that they see on Instagram. So that was like, okay, so that's not for me. And that doesn't mean that I think it's wrong that other people do it. I think people do it in a wonderful way, but I know that I don't feel comfortable with it. So that was one of the things that I started noticing. Okay, I'm not comfortable And when I understood why, I was like, you know what? I don't have to do that. I can do
Yeah.
different things, right? So, getting out of that idea of what you're supposed to share on social media as a yoga teacher, because there's so many out there and so many really beautiful Instagram feeds that share knowledge, that share um, background information about what yoga actually is, because it's so much more than the poses. And I found out that I tried to share all those things, but that's not what I'm comfortable sharing, because the more that I know, the more that I'm aware of the things that I don't know. You know how that goes? The more you
Mm.
learn, the more you realize you don't know anything. And I find it's not really my place in some way to share about yoga philosophy and to share about the background idea of yoga online. What I do want to share is about my experience. So that's how I started to more post about me, about how I try to implement yoga in my daily life. That for me, standing at the tram stop, like before our meeting, I was at the tram stop for a long time. I look up at the sky and I breathe and I push down through both my feet on the ground. And I try to share little things like that. Plus, I try to show people what kind of person I am, because I think even though the yoga obviously is the main reason that people will want to come to my classes, the most important thing when they get there is that they also found a class that fits them. And that means that I have to be a good fit. So by sharing who I am, I hope that people will not get disappointed when they come to class and think, oh, this lady. But instead think, oh yeah, she's familiar. I know this person, you know? So I
Mm.
think that's what I try to do. But I still get caught up sometimes in thinking, but I'm supposed to share, I don't know what, fill in the blanks, you know? I'm supposed to make reels of me doing beautiful yoga movements. And every now and then I try again. I'm like, and then it never feels right. And I think when it doesn't feel right, it doesn't work. You feel it, you taste that when someone posts something that they're not 100% in on,
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree on that. That it feels weird somehow. Somehow it conveys that this
right?
person doesn't feel comfortable with that,
Yeah.
and I can't say enough how I relate to these all shoots that you
Oh my
feel
gosh.
because the other yoga teachers, they are posting this, so I am supposed to do the same. And
Yes.
finding your own way, we were talking about this before starting recording, how it's so important in every aspect, but also in social media, or when you are a business owner, you are creating content and um, introducing yourself so people know you and know your service and how you help them. You need to find your way and need to be in a way that it feels good for you and it's not like it's cohesive with what you do and the way that you
Hmm.
see things and your values and all the stuff. And that's why when you are incorporating your story into that, it's helping people to understand, okay, this is why this person is acting in this way. This is why for them this is important and they are highlighting this value. And you have more context and you start knowing better the person. And you say, when they arrive to your lesson, to your class, they have an understanding of who you are as a person,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And something else that I like is how by doing your own way, you are making unique content, because by sharing how in your experience you are incorporating those moments of yoga in your daily life, you are creating unique content because it's your unique combination of experiences and expertise and your personality and what's important to you. So yeah.
Yes, it's true. I hadn't even looked at it like that, but that's very true. Yeah.
I would like to ask you now if you have had any unexpected challenges when sharing your story.
I think for me, not so much unexpected challenges, but the challenge of um, figuring out how to share without being too emotionally attached in the moment, especially when it's when you're in person with people. Like when you're sharing content online, it's a little bit different, I think. But finding the right level of letting people in, I think, and how to share. I have this really great teacher, Lizzie Lassiter, and she at some point said, "What I try to do is I try to share things that are not um, right now a big thing in my life. You know, I like to take things that are a little bit farther away, that were a big topic at some point, but I'm not in the midst of the emotions of it right now."
Mm.
And I think that is always a little bit challenging, like how much. And also, and that's something I didn't see coming, but now in hindsight, it's so obvious. But when you share about yourself, it's also an invitation for other people to share their story. And when you do that after yoga, it's the body is relaxed quite often, not always, but quite often the body feels relaxed. You've let go of tension, and sometimes that also means that people's boundaries go down. And sometimes I think people tend to overshare after classes, and maybe not overshare, but maybe they tell you more than they might do when you just meet them for coffee somewhere, you know? But because the
Mhm.
body is loose, you feel good, you feel safe. Then sometimes I think you tell maybe a little bit more, and afterwards you're thinking like, oh, I don't know if I wanted to share that. So I think that I started noticing in Holland, it's very common to offer people a cup of tea after class. And I noticed that a lot of people started sharing a lot of their lives and sometimes also things that were troubling them. And obviously, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm not a psychologist or a psychotherapist. So that is something that I've tried to find my ways to set my boundaries in, because that was something I wasn't expecting, but now thinking about it, it makes total sense that it happens. But that was something like, okay, I share a lot about myself. That is almost like an open invitation to people to share as well. And I'm definitely interested, but I'm not always qualified to hear those
Mhm.
things. So that's something I am now getting better in, but I didn't see that coming in the beginning.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting and made me think about I got training around coaching techniques that you can
Hmm.
incorporate as a consultant. And because I am not a coach, and the other people that were there, we were not a coach. It was like the trainer, he was like telling us how you are creating a space where people can share things,
Yes,
but you don't have the responsibility to fix those things.
exactly.
You're
Yes,
just creating space where they feel safe enough to share. And maybe that's the first step for them to look for help in a way that will help them with a different solution, but you are not responsible for that. So I
yes,
feel that kind of that situation and makes a lot of sense that the after yoga you feel more relaxed, you feel connected to the group of people that you have around.
yes, that too.
And so I can see how it's totally different for ourselves to be at the beginning of the class or at the end of the class after that
Yeah,
bond of doing this process together, right?
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yep. And now I've said this out loud, I'm thinking like, oh, if my students now listen to this, maybe they're now afraid to share. And of course, I love that people share afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think by now I've gotten better at also making sure that everyone's boundaries are safe after.
Hmm.
But that's because I've been teaching full time for quite some years now, and I've found my ways to make it safe enough, I think, for people to share things,
Mm.
but also respecting their own boundaries. And I know that in the beginning, sometimes people would tell me things. And I was like, oh, then you should probably go talk to someone like that. I don't do that anymore. I don't give advice Like you
Yeah.
said, it's the space to share. And if I do think someone does need help, I might later send them a message like, hey, if you
Mm.
feel like this is something you should do something with, do you have someone you can talk to? Just check in with people every now and then, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that finding that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back a bit about something that you share about how sharing something that is happening now and you are too emotional, or something that you are over it and you can feel more confident sharing about this. It's also important to have in mind how you can share about specific moment in a superficial level or with a lot of details depending on what you need and the way
Yes.
that you want to share them. But especially the most important part could be the lesson that you get from there, or the emotions that you felt in that moment,
Yeah.
or the insights that you get. So this process taught me this, as you are sharing more about the lesson that you get, and you are sharing the level of detail that you are prepared for and you are okay and comfortable with.
Yeah. And the important question I think for me to remember to ask myself sometimes, okay, why am I sharing this?
Mm,
What is the bigger purpose here?
yeah.
Because I'm not just there to talk about myself, whether it's online or in the classes. And what I've set up this structure where I will share stuff about myself on social media, but to a very, very certain extent. Like the boundaries there are quite clear. I will tell people like the biggest response I got in the past month on post was when I shared that I'd been sick and that I'm slowly getting back into it. And it was just me talking to the camera because I just wanted to update people that I was still there, you know? But that is one level. And then the level underneath that is I have my online membership where a small group of people, we come together live once a week if they can make it. And there's recorded content as well. But they also get a weekly, I call it the weekly love note. They get an email every Tuesday morning. And there I share a little bit more,
Mm,
right? That's my musings, my little brainstorms. I put those into that little love note that goes out to the members, and then they can read it or not. It's not necessary for them to read it, but because they make an investment in me, in the community, they share usually about themselves as well after classes. And I usually don't share after class. I just facilitate the space and we chat a little bit, but I do give them a little bit more of me in those notes. But I save it for them. And then when I see people in person, especially when we do retreats, when there's more time, that's where I will share an even deeper level. So there's layers to it because also it's a time thing as well. There's not always time to share.
mm,
And it's not always necessary. But when we do a retreat day or a retreat weekend, I take time to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the practice. And I use myself there also to help people go deeper by going deep myself.
mm. Nice. Um, I would like to ask you now about the process of deciding what to share or not, and
Hmm.
the concern about oversharing or sharing too much. Did you get some kind of help during that process? You did by yourself. How was that experience for you?
I think a lot came from I did so many trainings, but I did the second big yoga teacher training was with Heart and Bones Yoga, and that was an online training. And I think the way that she teaches, Bree Johnson, she's amazing. Go check her out for sure. The way that she shares and the way that she teaches taught me a lot about what I like in a teacher and what I respond to well. And what she does a lot of the things that we just talked about. Like she shares herself, she shares her ways of practicing yoga. She helps you think about, okay, what's important to me. So being in her training was very helpful because one, by who she was, who she is, she's still here, by who she is, and also because of the questions she asked us while we were going through the training. Yeah, there was a lot of introversion happening as well, like reflecting on who you want to be for others and what do you
Mhm.
need in order to be that person. Then I have one of my best friends is also a coach, and she's been extremely helpful for me by helping me find that I was oversharing my energy, not so much my story, but my energy. And she helped me give me some tools to actually protect my own energy better. And when I protect my own energy better, knowing intuitively what I want to share is easier. When I'm really
Mhm.
tired, I sometimes tend to, go in a little bit too deep, share a little bit too much. So I think those are the main things that help me find it. And also being okay with maybe oversharing sometimes, telling myself that it's okay sometimes to either give too much or too little, because it's human to not always give the right amount, you know? Yeah. Does that answer the question? I think that was
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Um, yeah, I like how now that you know yourself, you know that when you are tired, you can tend to overshare or share
Mm-hmm.
too much than in other situations. And that's a process because
Yes.
it's like in any other aspect, learn about who we are and learn about how we react to certain things and what situations make us feel comfortable or not. So I think that that is a process, and you start learning about also sharing your story or practicing as a teacher or any other stuff. Is like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you need to go through this, and over taking action you will learn about yourself, and you will get more information about how you react and how you act in
Yes.
certain situations, right?
Yes, and also doing it the other way around, like, oh, I reacted like this. What does this, where did that come from? You know? Yeah, getting to know yourself in that way is super interesting. Sometimes confrontational, but super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what could you say is a part of your story that people that surprised most the people?
I think people tend to not believe um, when I tell them what I was like before I started practicing yoga regularly. Because we talked a little bit before we started recording about this, but I had so many different types of jobs, and a lot of them were more than full-time jobs with quite a lot of pressure as well. And it was always organizational. So I was doing 20 things at the same time. And I was very impatient. I was like the most impatient person I know. So when I told my husband that I wanted to actually become a yoga teacher, he was so surprised because he's like, are you sure? Because, you're really impatient. But the practice of yoga, the becoming a teacher, it really slowed me down,
Mm.
which really was very beneficial for me because I was running. Looking back at it now, I was running until I became a yoga teacher to be everywhere at the same time and not realizing what that was doing to me physically and mentally. So now I'm very much the advocate to everyone to please slow down. Do everything as slow as you can. And I'm very patient with people. So now when I tell people like I could be really bitchy when people weren't going fast enough in my head, you know? So I think that's the most surprising thing, that I was very, very different. There's a Biddy before yoga and there's a Biddy after yoga.
There's a transformation
Yes,
there.
absolutely, absolutely. It took a long time. I mean, it sounds now like there was this switch, but no, the
Mm,
transition went gradually. But now looking back, yeah, it's definitely a different me now.
mm. Yeah, and I think that's one. Yeah, of course, I say that because I am like passionate about using your story. But I think that's one of the benefits of using your story, because now you have those two perspectives, and you know how you were before and impatient, and the change that practicing yoga has in you and in your
Hmm.
life. So I always like to find these, I call them story connectors, which is like elements of your story that are connected to what you offer and the way that you approach your work and that. So it's like finding these threads into all your experiences and your background, and now you can use that as a way to make people see how you really understand how they are running and in the process that they are, and maybe they are not so aware. And you know that because you were
Yeah.
there, you were
Yeah.
in that situation, and now from this s- path that you are in a different mindset and you can appreciate and you can really see how you were before, but because of that, like distance, so now you have the big picture, you can see how is the difference
Yes.
and all
Yes,
that.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's nice. And I think sometimes, because now it sounds like being patient and slow is the better way to be. But I think that's not necessarily the message. I think the message more is that transformation is possible.
Mm.
You know, a lot of people say, yeah, but that's just who I am. I said that for a long time. That's just who I am. I'm impatient. And then I was like, oh, but what if that's not the case? What if that's just the situation I put myself in, you know? So I think I'm not necessarily saying that I'm a better person now. I'm definitely feeling better.
Mhm.
So yeah, the focus on that connecting to your body can give you space to maybe feel more comfortable in your body. I
Mm.
think that's the main message there. But yeah,
Okay.
hindsight is always easier, obviously, but it's really nice to have lived through the transformation itself as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like how, yeah, it's like change is possible, and it's like things are not set in stone,
Yeah.
and you can give yourself permission to try.
Yes. And to see almost like you're trying on a new coat, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, what happens when I do listen to my body and when I do rest and leave that one task for tomorrow or next week? What happens? You know, just
Mm.
allowing yourself that curiosity and trying out what will happen. Because I think sometimes we're so stuck in our routine because it's easy and it's comfortable. It's what we know. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter that it's maybe not that good for us because we at least know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
But then making that one small change is maybe the first step of trying, like, oh, wait, the world didn't end when I didn't finish this job today or when I wrote the email the next morning, you know? It's stuff like that. It's little steps.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you. If people go after listening to this with that thought that transformation is possible, just try a little step and see
Yeah.
what happens. I think
Yeah.
that's a good one to share. So thank you. And thank you for all these experience and conversation, for sharing your point of view and your insights. Where can people find more about you and what you do?
Yeah. Well, my website has most information. That's yogavayu.nl. And there are many ways to get in touch with me. You can follow me on Instagram. That's the one social media that I'm actually active on. I decided to ditch all the others because that was just making my mind like go all over the place again. And yeah, I always love an email. So if you want to send an email at biddy@yogavayu.nl, I will definitely read it and respond. So those are the three main ways.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, just looking forward to keeping learning from you and your approach. Thank you.
Right back at you, Remy. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Who Cares About My Story, the podcast on how sharing your personal brand story can impact your business. If you found this episode valuable, consider subscribing or leaving a review. Your feedback means a lot. Did something resonate with you today? Please share your thoughts on the podcast platform or on your socials. I would love to hear from you and give you a shout out. Just tag me on Instagram at Reme Mancera. I can't wait for you to meet our next guest. Until then, remember, your story is relevant and worth telling.